What would happen if you blocked an old man driving a rusty pickup truck? And just minutes later, a 4-star Navy admiral stepped out of a government SUV and ordered you to stand at attention. They thought he was merely an eccentric old man. But they didn't know he had once been a Navy SEAL who rescued 115 hostages and never told a soul. Today's story isn't just about honor. It's about how a silent man taught an entire town what true respect really means. If you believe that true honor needs no display, watch until the end and share this with those who deserve to be remembered. Late afternoon in Redwood Springs, a small town nestled among the golden hills of Northern California. The sun pressed heavily onto the asphalt, stretching and blurring every shadow of person and vehicle beneath its scorching yellow light. No one paid attention to the 1,975 Dodge Ram rattling down Main Avenue, its body coated in a fine, mist-like dust, the plywood in its bed creaking each time the truck rolled over a pothole. The man behind the wheel, Jack Harrison, was as quiet as the aging engine growling beneath him. One sinewy hand gripped the steering wheel. The other rested lightly on his knee. On his left wrist ran a faded, winding scar like a dried-up riverbed. His old baseball cap was pulled low, obscuring half his forehead. His face revealed no expression, only sun-baked skin wrinkled around his eyes, and a once-broken nose now fused in a crooked line. Jack showed no sign of hurry, and nothing suggested he had anything to prove. In the truck bed lay several fresh boards, still smelling faintly of pine resin planks he intended to use to re-roof his elderly neighbor's house, a former Marine who had recently suffered a stroke. Not for money, nor out of obligation, simply because Jack believed it was a thing that should be done. But people seldom recognize what is right when it's not neatly packaged. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed behind him, strobing like a warning. Jack eased onto the shoulder without surprise. It wasn't the first time he'd been pulled over. But this time, he detected impatience in the thud of the squad car door closing. 2 young officers approached, their steps casual, as though this were merely another tedious afternoon check. Jack's dusty windshield reflected the face of the first officer as he leaned down. The young man's eyes swept over the worn cap and the chipped paint on the hood, as if searching for a valid reason to be suspicious. "No plates, no registration," the officer called out, his voice echoing in the dry air. "What suspicious cargo are you hauling in here?" Jack did not react. He placed both hands on the wheel, a reflex honed over years when those hands once gripped a rifle under enemy fire, once wiped blood from a comrade's eyes to save a life. Now, they only needed to steady himself. The second officer moved to the rear and raised his phone to photograph the truck. A half-smile spread across his unshaven face. "That old guy looks just like Rambo, huh?" Jack remained silent. He inhaled deeply, not to reassure them, but as if to contain the memories surfacing in his mind. He'd seen that same contemptuous look in Fallujah, in Mogadishu, and even during hearings after nameless missions. Those eyes knew nothing, and didn't want to know what lay behind that faded uniform. He had nothing to explain, and even if he did, few would truly listen. A hot breeze blew past, carrying the scent of gasoline from the nearby station. Jack squinted straight ahead, as though he were no longer standing on this roadside but back in some distant place where he once sat motionless for 46 hours in an underground bunker, awaiting evacuation. Then, he said nothing. Now, he remained silent still. They did not know who he was, and that, it seemed, gave them license to judge. The truck door screeched as the first officer yanked it open. Inside the Dodge Ram, there was nothing but what you'd find in any aging craftsman's pickup: bungee cords, a toolbox, a few battered water bottles, and a single fingerless glove. Nothing remarkable. Yet precisely because it looked so ordinary, it seemed suspicious to those accustomed to viewing the world through the lens of rules and statistics. The officer bent over and searched beneath the seat. The mixed sense of rusted metal and fresh timber made him wince. But he continued as though expecting a crucial discovery: a hidden firearm, a suspicious package, or at least a reason to justify the stop. But there was nothing. Only a worn envelope, its corners frayed, containing a yellowed piece of paper folded into quarters. He unfolded it. A SEAL training certificate dated 1971. Beneath it, a Department of Defense retirement notice dated 2005. In the slanted sunlight through the windshield, the bold signature remained crisp. The officer smirked, laughter escaping as if he just read an old joke. "What's this? Offering private security services?" Jack did not react to the derisive tone. He simply replied in a calm, measured voice honed by hundreds of debriefings. "I was a SEAL, but today I'm here to fix Mrs. Wilson's roof." For a half beat, the air went still, not because Jack's words were unexpected, but because they were so straightforward. No flair, no defensiveness, no attempt to impress. The second officer, standing by the tailgate, turned to his partner, hesitation in his eyes. Yet instead of stepping back, they both advanced cautiously, not out of fear, but out of doubt. Suspicion often accompanies ignorance, and here it was, fueled by the man's silence. "Is he the type who obsesses over safety?" one officer whispered. "This thing," he gestured at the truck, "shouldn't even be on the road." Word spread like oil on water. One bystander stopped to watch, then another joined, and soon a small crowd formed across the street. They didn't know what was happening, but seeing an old gray-haired man being grilled by two cops about a rusty truck, their imaginations filled in the blanks. A young woman recorded on her phone, whispering, "Looks like this old guy's up to something shady." No plates, like some ex-con. A man near the gas station raised an eyebrow and chuckled. "Check out his outfit. Like some doomsday delivery guy." The silver-haired old man, a teenager, sneered as he walked by, tossing out the remark like a joke. Jack heard every word. His hearing might not be as sharp as it once was, but he had learned to listen even before others spoke. Those words did not anger him, nor did they wound him. They were familiar. Like the crack of a stray bullet in a jungle night, startling, yet not unfamiliar. He had faced suspicion abroad, in nameless villages where he was the foreigner with a rifle. Here, he was again treated as an outsider, silent, unyielding. Beneath his thin t-shirt lay scars no one could see, no one asked about them, and none noticed. Jack offered no defense. He did not recount the times he pulled comrades from enemy fire, nor mention the ships he swam from in moonless raids. Not because he had forgotten, but because he believed true honor needs no telling. He simply stood in silence like a rock worn smooth by water yet retaining its shape. And that very composure rather than calming made the young onlookers even more uncomfortable. They did not understand this silence. To them, silence signified guilt. To him, it was a choice. The hot breeze still blew, the sun still beat down, and the crowd continued snapping photos and recording video. No one knew his name, no one knew what he had been. And that, once again, convinced them they knew enough to pass judgment. Time seemed to slow, as if it, too, felt uneasy at the scene unfolding in this peaceful town. More than 30 minutes passed. The sun began to tilt, stretching the shadows of every vehicle along the road by the inch. Meanwhile, the two officers were still hunched over their electronic tablet, their phones and radios, desperately seeking a justification to detain an elderly man who neither resisted nor cooperated as they wished. Their system yielded no warrants, no theft reports, no criminal records, just an old pickup truck lacking proper registration. A vehicle clearly unwanted for theft and thought harmless. Yet, whether from wounded pride or simple boredom at going so long without an arrest, they continued to hold him. As for Jack, he still sat there, silent, no asking, how much longer, no sighs, no hint of irritation. His posture remained unchanged, back straight, hands resting evenly on his thighs, gaze fixed on the horizon where rolling hills blurred like distant memories. Then a low rumble came from behind the engine of a large SUV. The glossy black government vehicle coasted to a stop beside the aging pickup, neither rushed nor loud. The door opened. A tall man stepped out, shoulders squared beneath a dark navy uniform, 4 bright stars on his epaulets gleamed in the golden afternoon light. He stood erect, did not look around, did not ask anyone's name. He simply adjusted his collar, drew in a breath, and strode forward, as if he knew exactly why he had come. That man was Colonel Robert Mitchell, senior commander of the Coast Guard's patrol forces, leader of dozens of emergency operations, security advisor to the Department of Defense, and most importantly, Jack Harrison's former comrade at the Mekong battlefield in 1993. No greeting, no introductions. Mitchell pointed directly at the 2 officers standing by the roadside, his voice low but commanding. "Which one of you stopped this vehicle?" The 2 officers jolted and turned around. A flash of confusion crossed their eyes as they realized the situation had spun beyond their control. Mitchell took a step forward, his voice resonant without harshness but carrying the weight of a lifetime of command. "Because the man you just stopped is the one I once commanded. The man who saved our entire unit from a nighttime shipwreck on the Mekong in 1993. Without him, I likely wouldn't be standing here talking to you." A sudden silence fell like a heavy velvet curtain. Neither officer could speak. Beads of sweat formed at their temples, their hands trembling as they clutched the stack of documents they had earlier mocked. A bystander nearby whispered, "What did he say? Who is that old man?" Mitchell allowed no response. He turned and walked over to Jack, who remained seated as before. Yet for a brief moment, Mitchell closed his eyes perhaps, to steady his own emotions. Mitchell did not offer a handshake like a social obligation. He simply inclined his body slightly, his gaze fixed on Jack as if performing a silent ritual. And Jack, for the first time that afternoon, gave a small nod in return. No one spoke further, but those gathered began to sense they had stumbled into something extraordinary, a quiet fragment of history unfolding in their small town. From that moment on, it was no longer merely a traffic stop. Not because of rank or uniform, but because of the eyes of a commander confirming that the silent man before them had been the living landmark of an unforgettable moment. Dear audience, please relax or grab a glass of water, then stay tuned for the rest of the story surprises still await. Comment 1 if you're enjoying this tale, so we know you're still with us. The air fell silent as Colonel Robert Mitchell slowly stepped forward, positioning himself between Jack and the gathering crowd. He raised a hand in a silent command, no words uttered, but his firm stance and resolute gaze were enough to compel those curious onlookers, phones raised to record, to lower their devices. They did not understand what was about to happen, but their instincts told them. This was no longer a roadside dispute, it was a moment of truth. Mitchell opened his leather briefcase and withdrew a carefully laminated document, its once golden trim now slightly faded but intact. His voice rang out clearly over the soft wind stirring the rooftops. "His name is Jack Hawk Harrison, a member of the Navy SEALs, awarded the Silver Star, Gold Star, and Navy Cross. In 1986, he single-handedly navigated through a brutal tropical storm in central Vietnam, leading 115 people, civilians and comrades alike, out of floodwaters nearly 8 hours before rescue helicopters arrived. Not a single life was lost that day, all thanks to him." The crowd gradually hushed. The mocking laughter and whispers died away, replaced by a strange, smoldering shame. Someone at the back took a step away, as though wanting to escape the gaze they had so misjudged. A middle-aged woman stepped forward. She wore a striped blouse and still clutched her grocery bag. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "In 2005, when Hurricane Katrina struck, my son was lost out on the bay. He was only 13. The whole town was in panic. It was him, this Jack, who taught those kids how to survive at sea. Because of his lessons, my son lived. They called him the Ghost Instructor." Mitchell only gave a slight nod, as if confirming what he had known all along. He spoke no more, for in his view, the truth is strongest when told by those who have lived it. From across the street, a silver-haired man leaning on a cane stepped forward. His voice was measured. "Haiti, in 2010, I was volunteering with the relief team. When the makeshift hospital was cut off by landslides, no one dared deliver medical supplies into that area except for an old man driving a rusty green pickup truck. He needed no map, no guide. Wherever someone needed help, that's where he would go. Several eyes turned toward the Dodge Ram parked silently at the curb. It was no longer a suspicious relic. Now, it stood as the silent witness to a life lived through storms, through war, through destruction and renewal. Mitchell looked at Jack, then addressed the crowd. He never sought recognition. No newspaper articles, no medals hanging on his walls. Jack used his own hands to rebuild roofs, pull people from floodwaters, and preserve the souls of soldiers so they would not perish in oblivion. I was once his commanding officer, but today, I stand here because I am alive thanks to this man. A sudden gust of wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine resin from the truck bed. No one dared laugh. No one filmed this as mere entertainment. Those who had mocked the suspicious old man now stood in hushed awe, seeing him as they had never seen him before, not as scars, not as age, not as a rusted truck, but as the quiet strength of one who has witnessed death and chosen to live rightly. And Mitchell, who had never lowered his voice before any officer, today spoke softly to an entire town. We may not know all the heroes among us, but once we do, at least stand still and listen. The sunlight had softened as the sun slowly drifted toward the horizon, yet the atmosphere around the rusty pickup remained heavy, as if words lay unspoken. Jack stood there, his voice calm, his demeanor undisturbed, silently, looking at the two young officers with eyes that did not accuse, but posed a question about human nature itself. He brought his hands together in front of his chest, a gesture neither of pleading nor of forgiveness. It was a simple yet solemn movement, performed by someone who had witnessed more than this world could imagine. His voice was not loud, yet each word rang out clearly, as if sharpened by years on the battlefield. I don't need you to apologize. He paused, giving those bowed heads the chance to meet his gaze. I only ask that whenever you encounter someone who looks like a suspicious old man, take 1 second, just 1 second, to ask yourself, do I know anything about this person's life? Or am I judging him by an old cap and a rusted truck? The two young officers remained motionless. One pressed his lips together, the other struggled not to look him in the eye. In that moment, no further lesson was needed, because they had just received what years of training could not teach: self-reflection. Mitchell stepped forward without another word, withdrew a stack of documents embossed with the Navy seal from his briefcase, and placed them in the hands of the senior officer, speaking simply. These are the officially verified records. I suggest you read them before filing any more reports today. The air around them seemed to exhale. Onlookers nodded quietly. Some bowed their heads, others stepped back, as if reminded that first impressions are often the most mistaken. Less than an hour later, a young woman's unedited video was posted online. It simply showed the sequence from Jack being asked to empty his pockets, to Colonel Mitchell's emergence, and his pointed declaration, "The man you just stopped is the one who saved my life." The clip spread like wildfire. 1 million views in 4 hours, 5 million in 2 days. Local news outlets began referring to him as the forgotten hero. The state television station came calling for interviews, but Jack declined. "I'm just the man who fixed a roof for a former Marine. That's enough." While Jack continued his quiet life, Redwood Springs had changed. Under community pressure, the city government enacted a new policy. All police officers are now required to undergo additional training on how to approach and interact with elderly individuals, especially veterans. In the training materials, an entire chapter was dedicated to Jack Harrison, a lesson in understanding. Without any hagiographic tone, that chapter simply recounted the day's events in full, concluding with Jack's final message. Honor isn't in the badge. It's in how we treat others, especially when we don't know who they truly are. At the Redwood Springs Police Department, an old photograph now hangs Jack driving his rusty pickup down Main Street without caption or commentary. Only this simple embossed line below. You never know who you've just stopped. Just 7 days after that silent afternoon, Redwood Springs' town hall was packed for the official proclamation of a new day in the town's history. Mayor Greenwood, his voice solemn and resonant, stood at the wooden podium holding a document printed on thick ivory paper. Effective today, the 10th of July of every year shall be recognized as Jack Hawk Harrison Day, in honor of a hero who quietly served his community, his country, and his fellow human beings without spotlight, without medals, without titles. Polite applause rose unobtrusive but enduring, profound. In the crowd, many who first heard the name just a week ago now stood silently, hats in hand, eyes fixed on the enlarged photograph behind the stage jack bent to re-roof a half-blinded veteran's home. Not a wartime scene, no guns, no uniform, just a person doing the right thing in quiet. From across the state, donations poured in. Over $320,000 arrived in less than a week. No fundraising appeals, no publicity, only Jack's story spreading like a powerful, silent wave. All of those funds, under Jack's direction, were allocated to 3 projects he deemed more necessary than a statue. Project 1. Build over 200 wheelchair ramps for veterans and people with disabilities in rural areas, places where a single step remains a barrier. Project 2. Establish a scholarship fund for veterans' children pursuing maritime, aviation, or public service careers. Young people who would inherit not only their parents' lineage, but also their spirit of service. Project 3. Open a free recovery center for discharged service members where they can reintegrate, heal, and learn to navigate civilian life, both body and spirit. Jack made no speech at the ceremony. He simply drove his old Dodge Ram to the lumber yard as usual. No one insisted he attend, and he felt his presence was unnecessary. Yet from that day on, whenever that blue truck rumbled past the police station, instead of flashing lights or a summons, passers-by raised a hand in salute, not out of duty, but out of respect. And one weekend afternoon, the young officer who once mocked him quietly approached Jack's front door, no uniform, nothing in hand but his own remorse. He paused for a moment before knocking. Jack opened the door, his hands still dusted with sawmill shavings, the scent of pine resin clinging to his shirt. The young officer looked up, his voice low. I'm sorry, and I want to learn. Jack did not ask what he wished to learn. He did not test whether the officer's contrition was sincere or merely the result of pressure. He simply regarded him for a long moment, then nodded, his eyes no longer cold as they had been before, but calm like a lake after a strong wind. He offered a slow, genuine smile, as if waiting for the young man to find the courage to believe the answer. Learn anything you like, just start with, I don't know, and I need to learn. No flowery words, no philosophical lecture, just a simple truth that understanding begins when we are willing to take a step back, listen a little, and accept that none of us knows everything. From that day on, the young officer spent every Saturday volunteering at the newly opened recovery center named Hawk House. No one forced him to do so. Yet it seemed that a door had been opened not only in Jack's small home, but within the officer's own heart. Jack Hawk Harrison's story did not end there. For a man who does not seek to be remembered is one who cannot be forgotten. Some live their lives seeking recognition, and some live quietly to do what is right, even if no one sees. Jack Hawk Harrison is one of the latter. He requires no fanfare, no memorials. Yet it is people like him who have quietly supported an entire community, even a nation, with courage, steadfastness, and unconditional kindness. Perhaps the greatest lesson of this story is that we never truly know whom we stand before. So lead with respect, not prejudice, with listening, not judgment. If this story moved you, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, or tell us about a silent hero you have known. And if you believe kindness can spread, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story so others may feel its impact. Thank you for taking the time to listen. See you in the next story.